Hello and welcome back. This lecture will go over cellular processes and a little crash course biology review. Today's focus will be on characteristics of life and how natural selection is a driving force for adaptations that allow organisms to survive. You may remember learning of Charles Darwin. He was an influential biologist, and he wrote a book where he presented the first well-supported theory of how evolution works. And he wasn't the only scientist who studied this. It was well supported by a multitude of different scientists. And they came up with this theory of natural selection. And so what natural selection is it is an explanation of how species originate over time by a series of changes. So animals that have specific traits help them survive in their environment. Those that have traits that help them survive better in their environment are typically the ones that are going to live long enough to reproduce and pass that trait on to the next generation. So over time, especially as an environment changes, animals or organisms with the adaptations that help them survive in their environment will be the ones that survive. So over time, like millions, I'm talking millions of years here, these organisms have changed enough to where they're different from the original species. And so that is the theory of natural selection, that over time, these species change, and that helps us understand the human body. So when we say evolution, what we mean by that is that it is a change in genetic composition of a population over time. So I'm talking thousands to millions of years. It's not just a couple generations. For example, if you look at the current variety of dogs that we have to choose from, dogs and wolves have a common ancestor. A wolf did not give birth to a dog or a chihuahua or a pug. Wolves and dogs cannot breed. They are different species, but they have a common ancestor from a long, long time ago. And one group has changed just enough to where they can no longer interbreed because there is a genetic difference between those two populations now. So it's not that a wolf gave birth to a puppy. No. Long ago, there was the gray wolf, and that is the common ancestor to the common wolf and to the now common dog. And so how evolution works is through natural selection. There are selective pressures, and those selective pressures usually come from predators. If they can easily spot an animal that stands out in its environment, they're probably going to eat it. And one of my favorite examples of this is the black-peppered moth story. The black-peppered moth what used to mostly be a tannish white-colored moth. And there's a variation. It can be this tannish white color or this kind of grayish salt and pepper type color. Well, in the natural environment, the darker moths were more commonly picked out and eaten by predators. Well, after the Industrial Revolution, pollution went into the environment and the environment changed. And so now the darker colored moths were better camouflaged from predators. And so the lighter color moths were then picked out and eaten by predators. And so we've actually seen the population of the moth change to being this darker color instead of the lighter color. So that is promoting the reproductive success of the darker colored individuals more so than the lighter colored individuals. And when these variations occur, a lot of times they are due to a mutation, just some random mutation. If you've ever wondered where blue eyes come from, it's a mutation of the brown-eyed gene. So if you have blue eyes, it's from a brown eye mutation. And some of these adaptations help the organism survive. And if it is a positive adaptation, then that will reduce the pressure for their survival and it will help them succeed. So they'll be able to reproduce and they'll be able to pass that positive adaptation onto the next generation, where the ones who don't have it are probably going to get eaten. And then, given thousands of years, those organisms are going to change to where they are just enough to where they are so different that they can no longer breed with the original population. So the principal theory of how evolution works is natural selection. Evidence of that is some human anatomical and physiological features that can be traced back to ancestral primates. So once again, this is not saying that humans came from chimpanzees or monkeys. However, there is a common ancestor that lived millions and millions of years ago. And these early primates were arboreal, meaning they were tree dwelling. So they needed to have very mobile shoulders so that way they could move better among the branches. And they also had to have those opposable thumbs. Their eyes forward facing, and color vision. Color vision was adapted so we could find ripe fruit. And if you look at the brain, larger brains allow for more memory and efficient food finding. And what's interesting is actually if you look at the brains between like a monkey, a chimpanzee, and a human, you'll find that the number of folds is a little bit different. Humans have the most highly folded brains, while monkeys have a more smooth brain, and then chimpanzees are in the middle. And we know that the folding of the brain increases the surface area of the brain. And those increased folds allow for more surface area and for more social connections to be made. Bipedalism is where you stand and walk on two legs. And in order to stand and walk upright, there had to be a spinal and pelvic anatomy adaptation that evolved in connection with human upright walking. This helped spot predators, carry food and tools, and even those infants. It was an adaptation to living in the grassland. And there were also skeletal and muscular, other skeletal muscular modifications. I'm not going to test you on these points, but just take a look at this. 3 millions, 2.5 million years, 1.8 million years. So evolution takes time. It takes millions of years for these adaptations to slowly change the species so that way it is eventually different from that original population. This section is where I will go over the levels of organization and some anatomical variation. So everything is made up of atoms, right? And so the atoms are going to come together to form molecules, and those molecules will eventually come together to form a cell. And at the cell, that is where we have the smallest unit of life. Similar cells with a common function are going to come together to form tissues, and 2 or more types of tissues will come together to form an organ. Groups of organs that are working towards a common goal will form an organ system. And the organ systems will all come together for the highest level of structural organization, which is the organism. Human organization is based on levels of hierarchy. An organism is made up of organ systems. So we have 11 body systems, and then those body systems will then be made up of organs, and organs will be made up of tissues. Tissues will be made up of cells, and cells are made up of organelles, and organelles are made up of molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms. You want to be able to go back and forth either way through the levels of organization. So the atom is the smallest particle with unique chemical identity. And if you have 2 or more atoms that come together, those form molecules. And not all atoms come together to form molecules. There are ions in the body like calcium or potassium or sodium, which we'll talk a lot about those. But molecules will come together to form macromolecules, and we have 4 major macromolecules in the body. There are carbohydrates, lipids or fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. Those come together to form our organelles. Those are going to be structures that carry out functions within a cell. So just like human bodies have organs, cells have organelles. The cell is the smallest unit of life to carry out all basic functions. And then the tissues are similar cells and cell products that form a discrete region of an organ, and it can perform a specific function. 2 or more tissues will come together to form an organ, so that way they can carry out a function. And organs will have a defined anatomical boundaries. And you can have organs within organs. In the human body, we have 11 different organ systems. These are groups of organs with a unique collective function. We'll talk about all of those, and all of those organ systems will come together to form the organism. Just like there are different models and diagrams that are available, and even though we study with some diagrams, we should be able to identify what structures are, no matter if you've ever seen the picture or ever looked at the model before, because no 2 humans are alike. There are even differences between identical twins. And if there is a surgeon, they get somebody cut open, they can't just be like, oh, this isn't what I remember it looking like. Sew you back up. So sorry, too bad. a surgeon has to be familiar with different versions of anatomy because there is anatomical variation. Right, so what we're going to use is the most common organization of structures, but there are some individuals who might lack certain muscles. There are some individuals, if you look at your tendons in your wrist, some people have 2 tendons, some have 3 tendons. Some individuals can have an atypical number of vertebrae or even certain organs like the kidneys. And some people can have reversal of their organ placement. So here is an example of variation in anatomy of the kidneys. And so if you look at the location of the kidneys, you typically have a right kidney and a left kidney. So this is normal here in the green. But you can have one of those kidneys be located down in the pelvic floor. Or sometimes those kidneys didn't separate during embryonic development and you have like this horseshoe-shaped kidney. And there can even be some variation within the heart. So there's some branches off of the aorta. If you look at the normal heart, the aorta is this large red vessel coming off of the heart, and there's typically 3 branches, but some people might have 2. And then you can see that in the normal heart, there's the first branch here, that's the brachiocephalic. It branches into the right carotid and the right subclavian, but then over here in this heart, those 2 branching happen later. And then we have these other types of variations that you might see off of that aorta. Physiological variation is even more variable than anatomical variation because we have different sex. We have a wide variation in ages, what the people are eating, how much they weigh, what is their exercise, even their genetics, how quickly they metabolize drugs is different based off of their genetics and then the environment the person lives in. So, for example, a hemoglobin level of 12 grams per deciliter is normal for an adult female, but that would be low for an adult male. And failure to consider variation can lead to under medication or over medication, or medicating women on the basis of research that's done on men. So we need to be able to take these things into consideration. And I will end this section here and pick up and see you guys in the next one.